Welcome to the debate. Usually when we look at a physical injury, there's this expectation of precision, you know?
Right.
Like you break your arm, the x-ray shows that jagged white line, and the doctor just points and says, there it is, that's the fracture. It's binary, clean.
We like things to be visible. We want cause and effect to be easily categorized so we know exactly what went wrong and how to fix it.
Exactly. But then you step into the world of generational trauma and family betrayal, and suddenly that x-ray machine is just completely useless.
Oh, totally useless.
Yeah, and we're looking at a moral landscape that is incredibly murky. A perfect example of this is a moment we discussed recently regarding the Congo War.
Ah, right. The time travel paradox, or, well, the supposed paradox.
Yes, the supposed paradox. There was this lingering assumption that when Iolite saw Xeonix on that battlefield, he somehow peered into the future or witnessed some mystical prophecy of his own defeat.
Which we need to be very clear about. That is entirely wrong.
It is, because if we look closely at the text, that entirely strips away his agency. Iolite does not travel through time. Nobody travels through time in this universe except Xeonix.
Ever. Period.
Right. So when Iolite saw Xeonix bending time using the elemental arts, he didn't see destiny. He looked at a young man fighting alongside his brother, recognized the techniques, became suspicious of the strong family resemblance, and logically deduced that his brother has or will have a family.
Which is a massive distinction.
It was pure, cold deduction.
I mean, it grounds his character in human calculation rather than predetermined destiny. He isn't a passive actor in a cosmic play, you know? He is an active observer who puts the pieces together in real time.
And that active, calculating nature is exactly what brings us to today's central question, drawn right from Gentrics Book 1.
It's the ultimate question for him, really.
It is. Looking at this monumental antagonist, we are forced to ask, is Iolite a sympathetic villain born of profound, inescapable tragedy? Or is he a figure of pure, irredeemable evil?
The classic debate.
Right. And I look at his history and I see a profound tragedy. I mean, Iolite is a brother who lived his entire life in the crushing, suffocating shadow of a legend. Everything he becomes grows out of that initial fundamental wound.
Okay.
And understanding that pain is absolutely essential, even if it doesn't excuse the horrific things he ultimately does.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Sympathy is a dangerous trap here. I look at the exact same history, the exact same timeline, and I see calculated malice.
Malice? Over tragedy?
Yes. Let me tell you why. We are talking about a man who spent 20 years patiently, methodically engineering the destruction of a child who had done absolutely nothing to him. Patience on that scale isn't the byproduct of emotional pain. It is the definition of pure evil.
But you can't separate his actions from the systemic failure of his family unit. Iolite's descent isn't just a story about a bad seed randomly going rogue.
A failure? How so?
It is the story of a systemic, structural failure within the Novos bloodline. Imagine the sheer psychological weight of growing up constantly overshadowed by the noble, universally revered figure of Xeon clerics.
Sure.
His brother isn't just successful, he is the whistling swordsman. He is a literal walking legend in Pikoresh.
A heavy shadow, undoubtedly. But living in a shadow doesn't automatically turn you into a tyrant.
It does when the shadow is accompanied by total parental rejection. Beneath that public shadow is a deeply private, prevailing feeling of being entirely unloved by their father.
I mean, the family dynamic was bad, yes.
It was fundamentally shattered long before the first shots of the Congo War were ever fired. And what makes it a tragedy, what removes a layer of his culpability, is the presence of Eon Pax.
The Imperial mastermind himself?
Exactly. Eon Pax is a master at identifying structural psychological weaknesses. He looked at the Novus family, saw this massive fracture, and actively weaponized him. He didn't just hand Iolite a sword and recruit him.
Right.
He groomed a vulnerable, neglected, desperate son. Eon Pax figured out exactly what currency Iolite lacked: validation, power, a sense of belonging. And he provided it. solely to forge him into a weapon for his empire. You have a broken boy being manipulated.
You are using familial neglect as a shield for atrocity. And in a universe as brutal as Picodash, that argument completely falls apart.
I'm not shielding him, I'm explaining him.
Look, we all acknowledge that crimes of passion happen, lashing out in a moment of burning jealousy, making a terrible mistake because you feel unloved. Those are human failings. We can sympathize with a fleeting moment of weakness.
Right.
But Iolite's methodology is terrifyingly patient. When he targets the novice bloodline, he doesn't act in a fit of rage. He doesn't just throw a tantrum.
Well, no.
His capacity to defer his gratification, to sit in the dark for decades just to maximize the suffering of an innocent person, is a completely different pathology. It completely overrides whatever childhood insecurity he felt, because it requires a sustained, conscious choice to be cruel every single day.
But that cruelty didn't manifest out of thin air. We have to look at the specific catalyst that finalized the brothers' falling out. The incident in the Shoalin timber forest.
Oh, here we go.
No, hear me out. Iolite attempts to steal the Infinity Crest. Now, Gentrics actually doesn't provide a deeper backstory in the text for why the father hated Iolite so vehemently from the beginning. We just see the result.
Right, the book leaves that pretty ambiguous.
So, since the book doesn't state why he turned on his brother initially, I have to speculate. Perhaps Iolite never had an inherent affinity for the peaceful, sustaining elemental arts that his family valued so highly.
You think his father rejected him early on as defective?
Yes. If he couldn't manipulate the environment to foster life the way Xeon clerics could, his father might have rejected him. And if a father rejects a son for his inherent nature, for something he cannot control, and that son subsequently tries to steal a source of immense power just to prove his worth.
You call that desperation?
You have to view that theft through the lens of desperation. It's a desperate, catastrophic cry for acknowledgement.
A cry for acknowledgement? Are you kidding me? You are severely downplaying the mechanics of what he actually tried to do.
It was a desperate act.
You're talking about stealing the Infinity Crest, like he tried to steal a family heirloom off the mantle to pawn it. He tried to rip the living heart out of the Shoalin timber forest.
I know the stakes were high.
The Infinity Crest doesn't just sit there looking pretty. It regulates the entire biosphere. It feeds the root systems. To take it is to trigger an unstoppable ecological meltdown.
Well, yes, but
What he did was the equivalent of setting your own house on fire with your family inside just because you didn't get the biggest bedroom.
that's a huge exaggeration.
It really isn't. It wasn't a cry for help. It was an act of profound sociopathic disregard for the catastrophic environmental consequences that would ravage the entire Picodash continent.
But
If he pulls that crest, the soil turns to ash. The elemental balance collapses. He was entirely willing to let the world rot, just so he could feel powerful for 5 minutes.
you are focusing purely on the external consequences and completely ignoring the internal emotional engine driving the act. You have to look at the physical manifestation of his malice.
The elemental arts are just tools.
No, let's talk about the elemental arts themselves. In Gentrics' universe, the elemental arts are not just physical tools. They aren't just weapons you pick up and swing.
Sure, they have a spiritual component.
The text makes it incredibly clear that the elemental arts are a direct physical interface with the user's soul. How you feel, what you value, your psychological state, it all dictates how the energy manifests in the physical world.
Right.
On the Congo War battlefield, we see this contrast beautifully illustrated. Xeon Clerics wields this revitalizing, gentle green wind. It breathed life into the environment around him. And pushing against it, Iolite wields this corrupted, suffocating red wind.
And you think that red wind is just a symptom of his sadness?
I think it is the physical manifestation of his rotting jealousy and internal pain. He isn't just casting a spell. The red wind literally taxes his own life force.
It is a heavy technique, sure.
It is heavy, it is oppressive, and it suffocates everything it touches because that is exactly what he is experiencing internally. He is bleeding his trauma out into the atmosphere. The very mechanics of the elemental arts in that scene prove that he is a man in absolute unrelenting agony.
I understand the mechanism, but you are entirely stripping him of his agency. The elemental arts interface with the soul, yes, but the red wind is a choice to embrace corruption. He cultivated that suffocating energy. He fed it.
It's trauma made physical.
If his actions are just the flailings of a pained, overshadowed brother, if he is so blinded by his own psychological trauma, how do you explain his cold-blooded deduction on that very same battlefield?
Because the trauma hones his survival instincts.
Let's walk through exactly what happens in the Congo War. Xeonix bends time, right? He ends up on that battlefield. Iolite clashes with him.
Right.
Iolite is currently in the middle of a war, supposedly consumed by this agonizing red wind of jealousy. But what does he do when he locks eyes with Xeonix? He studies his techniques. He recognizes the footwork.
He realizes who he's fighting.
He sees the family resemblance. He realizes in real time that this mysterious fighter is using the Nova's bloodline techniques.
Right.
If Iolite is just a wounded, emotionally volatile victim, he should react with blind rage. He should lash out. He should have a breakdown realizing that his efforts to wipe out his brother's legacy have somehow failed.
He does react. He fights him.
But he doesn't fight him with blind emotion. He reacts with terrifying calculation. He stands there on the mud of the Congo War battlefield, puts the pieces together, deduces exactly who Xeonix is, and instantly formulates a multi-generational strategy.
Eon Pax taught him to do that.
He doesn't scream at the heavens. He thinks, my purge has failed. My brother's line survives into the future. I need a new plan. That level of emotional detachment in the middle of a visceral combat scenario isn't pain. That is psychopathy.
I completely disagree that it's psychopathy. That calculation is a learned survival mechanism. You have to remember who his mentor is.
Eon Pax.
Yes. When you are taken in and groomed by Eon Pax, a tyrant whose entire empire is built on suppressing panic and immediately strategizing, you learn to mimic that behavior. Iolite suppressing his immediate emotional reaction to plan his next move is exactly what Eon Pax trained him to do. It's a tragedy of conditioning.
Then let's talk about the ultimate result of that conditioning, because this is the specific point where any argument for his sympathy completely collapses. The 20-year grooming plan.
Well, it is an incredibly dark pivot in his strategy. I won't deny that.
It is the ultimate unforgivable betrayal of Xeonix. Because once Iolite deduces the truth on that battlefield, what does he do? He orders his most ruthless, highly trained warrior, Malamar Kenshin, to infiltrate Xeonix's life.
To act as a mentor, yes?
He commands Malamar to step into that role, to gain this young, innocent boy's absolute trust, and then to slowly, methodically fill his path with despair.
It's brutal.
It is the darkest pivot imaginable. And the mechanics of how it was executed are vital. We need to be crystal clear on the canon facts of Gentrics' timeline here.
Right, regarding how he got there.
Malamar was planted years in advance. He was never sent into the future via some elemental arts manipulation. Malamar lived normal, consecutive days. He aged forward through normal time.
The endurance required for that kind of deception is staggering.
It strips away any claim to humanity Iolite might have had left. Think about the mundane horror of it. Iolite commanded a man to spend 2 decades waking up every single morning, looking a growing child in the eyes, pretending to care for him.
Acting as a father figure.
Training him, acting as a father figure, all while secretly plotting to break his soul from the inside out. Malamar had to eat breakfast with this kid. He had to patch up his scraped knees, and every step of the way, he was reporting back to Iolite.
Yeah.
If Iolite just wanted to end his brother's bloodline, an assassination would have taken 1 night, it would have been violent, but it would have been merciful compared to this.
True.
He didn't want Xeonix dead. He wanted to conquer his soul. He wanted to forge him into a broken, malleable weapon, just like Eon Pax did to him.
It's a horrific cycle.
Waiting 20 years, knowing you are slowly poisoning a young man's mind, making him believe his master loves him when his entire life is a trap. That is pure, irredeemable malice. It takes a monster to sign off on a 20-year psychological torture campaign against a child.
You know, I have to admit, this is where my defense of his humanity hits a hard wall.
I would hope so.
No, truly, I will concede this point to you. This specific, methodical psychological torture of Xeon crosses a moral event horizon.
It really does.
The sheer endurance required to orchestrate and sustain a lie of that magnitude for 20 normal consecutive years requires a level of premeditated cruelty that I cannot justify. The tragedy of his youth, the crushing shadow of Xeon clerics, even the grooming by Eon Pax, none of it balances the scales against what he knowingly did to a child through Malamar. The malice outgrew the trauma.
I appreciate that concession. It really is a staggering violation of trust, and the text forces us to sit with the weight of that 20-year lie.
It does.
But, in the spirit of intellectual charity, I will concede a major point to you as well.
Oh, go ahead.
Eon Pax was the necessary catalyst. He truly was a master manipulator who found the perfect microscopic crack in the novice and cleric's bloodline and wedged it wide open.
He exploited them perfectly.
If Iolite had been born into literally any other family, perhaps a family in Sukar or Aryan, where he wasn't constantly measured against a living saint, he likely wouldn't have become a monster.
Right, he might have just lived a quiet, somewhat bitter life.
Exactly. He might have been harmless. It took the specific, intense pressure of Xeon Cleric's legend, combined with Eon Pax's predatory grooming, to forge him into a warlord.
So despite his ultimate descent, the environment was the forge. To summarize where we stand, I maintain that the deepest roots of Iolite's villainies lie as a tragic, systemic, familial wound.
Right.
Understanding how his feelings of inadequacy were weaponized by an empire is essential to understanding the text, even if he eventually crosses the line into unforgivable territory.
And I maintain that regardless of how he started or the environment he was raised in, his decades of calculated sadism override his origins. His infinite patience in destroying Xeonix proves that the trauma is no longer an excuse. The malice became his defining characteristic.
Which is precisely what makes Gentrics' world so brilliant. The material intentionally blurs the line between victimhood and villainy.
It really does.
Tension between the tragedy of how someone is made and the horror of what they choose to do, it leaves us to grapple with how much weight we should truly give to a villain's origin story when their current actions are so horrific.
There is no easy, clean X-ray here. We have to leave the listener genuinely torn on where to draw that line.
Absolutely. The deeper you dig into these character motivations, the more complex the bedrock gets.
There's so much more to explore in this material, and the family dynamics honestly only get more complicated from here.
Oh, definitely.
In fact, that perfectly sets up our next discussion. Next time, we are going to pivot slightly and analyze the tactical nightwear of Fusemaster's weapon and how its mechanics completely upend the traditional rules of elemental combat in this universe.
Oh, I'm excited for that one. And what makes that upcoming discussion even more compelling is the revelation regarding his background. Fusemaster and Creator Steve are also brothers.
It just never ends.
It doesn't. It just reinforces this profound theme that the history of Pico Dash really is a story about brothers, all the way down, which brings us right back to that medical analogy.
Right.
You look at this world trying to find a simple good versus evil, a clean fracture you can point to on an X-ray. But the deeper you look into these families, the more you realize you're just staring at the infinitely complex, muddy waters of human nature.